Welcome to International Management, the podcast that breaks down the core challenges and strategies of global business. Based on Orlando Casabon's scripts for his international management class, each episode offers practical insights, clear strategies, real-world examples, and expert guidance to help you navigate complex global landscapes. For additional resources, visit casabon.com. Now, let's dive into the essentials of international management.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into a topic that's really essential for businesses looking to expand globally. International strategic management.
Yeah, it's a big one. I mean, these days, companies really have to think beyond their borders, right? You can't just rest on your laurels in your home market anymore.
Right. It's a whole different ballgame when you're competing on a global scale.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin? What are the guiding principles? What are the things that companies need to consider when they're developing an international strategy?
Well, there are these sort of fundamental philosophies that underpin everything, these kind of like foundational ideas about how a company sees the world and its place in it.
Okay, so let's talk about these philosophies. What are the different approaches that companies take when they're thinking about going global?
So the first one is what we call the ethnocentric approach. It's kind of like what works here works everywhere. Companies with this mindset, they basically believe that their home country's practices are, the best, and they just try to replicate their domestic success in foreign markets.
So it's like a cookie cutter approach. You take what worked at home and try to stamp it out all over the world. But wouldn't that be a bit naive? Ignoring cultural differences and stuff. I mean...
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, think about it. You can't just assume that what works in one culture is going to work in another. Tastes are different. Customs are different. The whole business environment can be totally different.
Right. It's like trying to sell ice to Eskimos. So what's the alternative?
Well, that's where the polycentric approach comes in. It's basically the opposite of ethnocentric. It's all about embracing those local differences, recognizing that, each country is unique. Companies using this approach tend to give their subsidiaries a lot more autonomy to tailor products and strategies to local tastes.
So it's more about adapting to the local market, being sensitive to those nuances. But wouldn't that be incredibly resource intensive? I mean, creating highly customized strategies for every single country you operate in.
It can be. That's why a lot of companies end up somewhere in between these two extremes. There's this another approach called regiocentric, which kind of splits the difference.
Regiocentric, so it's like a regional approach.
Exactly. Instead of looking at every country individually, you group them into regions with shared characteristics. Like you might have a strategy for Southeast Asia, a different one for Latin America, and so on.
That makes sense. Kind of like finding that middle ground between global consistency and local adaptation. But what about companies that are really aiming for a truly global presence, like they want to be everywhere? What's their philosophy?
That's where the geocentric approach comes in. This is about seeing the world as one interconnected marketplace. Companies with this mindset, they want to be both globally efficient and locally responsive.
Okay, that sounds like a tough balancing act. How do they manage that?
It's definitely not easy. It takes a lot of coordination, a lot of communication. They're constantly trying to find ways to share knowledge and best practices across borders. And they're not afraid to source talent from anywhere in the world if it means getting the best people for the job.
So it's like creating this global network where ideas and innovation can flow freely. That's fascinating. But even with the right philosophy in place, I imagine it's still a huge challenge to translate those ideas into concrete actions.
Oh, absolutely. Having a philosophy is just the starting point. The real work begins when you move from thinking about your global strategy to actually putting it into practice. And that's where we get into the two main phases of international strategic management: strategy formulation and strategy implementation.
Okay, so you've got the big picture vision, but how do you actually make it happen? Let's break it down. What does strategy formulation involve?
Strategy formulation is all about planning. It's like, if you're building a house, you need a blueprint, right? You can't just start laying bricks without a plan. So strategy formulation is about setting clear objectives, analyzing the competitive landscape, figuring out your strengths and weaknesses, and coming up with a roadmap to achieve your international goals.
So it's like the strategic framework, the planning phase. What are the key steps involved in this process?
Well, first you need to define your company's mission statement. This is like your North Star, your guiding principle. It should articulate your core values, your purpose, what you stand for in the world.
So it's about clarity, making sure everyone's on the same page about what the company's all about, what its goals are. But how do you translate that mission statement into a tangible strategy?
That's where the SWOT analysis comes in. It's a classic tool for a reason. It forces you to look at your company from all angles, your internal strengths and weaknesses, and the external opportunities and threats that exist in the marketplace.
Right, the SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. It's about taking stock of your internal and external environment, seeing where you stand. What happens after you've done this assessment?
Well, then you move on to setting strategic goals. And these goals need to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. The SMART goals framework.
Ah, yes. SMART goals framework. I love a good acronym.
Yeah.
But these strategic goals are still pretty high level, right? How do you break them down into something more actionable?
That's where you get into the tactical goals and plans. This is where you start to get into the nitty-gritty, the specific actions, the timelines, the resource allocation, the metrics you'll use to track your progress.
So strategic goals are like the what, and tactical goals are the how.
Exactly. And of course, you need a way to make sure you're staying on track, right? That's where a control framework comes in. It's about setting up systems to monitor performance, measure results, and make adjustments along the way.
So it's like having a dashboard that gives you real-time feedback on your progress. You can see what's working, what's not working, and make course corrections as needed.
Precisely. So you've got the mission statement, the SWOT analysis, the strategic goals, the tactical plans, and the control framework. That's your blueprint for international success.
That sounds pretty comprehensive. But we're not done yet, right? Formulating the strategy is just the first step.
You're absolutely right. The real challenge, the real test, is putting that strategy into action. And that, my friend, is what we call strategy implementation.
Well, this is already fascinating. We've laid the groundwork for understanding how companies approach international strategic management. But let's dive deeper into the specific components of a successful international strategy after a quick break.
Sounds good to me.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Before the break, we were talking about the big picture of international strategic management, the philosophies and the planning process. But now I want to get into like the nuts and bolts, the actual building blocks of a successful international strategy. What are the key ingredients that make a company stand out on a global scale?
Yeah, it's kind of like, you can have the best recipe in the world, but if you don't have the right ingredients, it's not going to taste good. You need those core strengths, those fundamental elements that allow a company to compete and win in the global marketplace.
So let's talk about those ingredients. What's the first building block? What's the first thing companies need to figure out?
Well, I'd say the most important ingredient is what we call distinctive competence. It's that special something that sets a company apart from its rivals. It's what gives them a competitive edge.
So it's like their secret sauce, their unique advantage in the global arena.
Exactly. It could be anything, really. Superior technology, a really strong brand, a well-established distribution network, a culture of innovation, even just a deep understanding of a particular customer segment.
So it's about figuring out what you're really good at, what makes you stand out from the crowd. But how do you translate that distinctive competence into an actual strategy?
That's where the second building block comes in, defining your scope of operations. It's about deciding where you're going to play geographically and which customer segments you're going to target. You got to choose your battles carefully. You can't be everything to everyone everywhere.
Right. It's about focus, picking your spots and concentrating your resources where you can make the biggest impact.
Yeah. You can't be all things to all people in all places. You got to be strategic about where you invest your time and energy. And once you've figured out your scope of operations, the next step is resource deployment.
Okay. So you got your unique strengths and you know where you want to play. Now it's about figuring out how to allocate your resources effectively across those different markets.
Exactly. Resource deployment is all about making smart choices about how you're going to use your capital, your people, your time. It's about investing in the right markets, building the right infrastructure, and putting the right people in the right roles.
It sounds like a complex balancing act, especially when you're dealing with different currencies, regulations, economic conditions all over the world.
It definitely can be. You got to be able to think globally but act locally. And then there's the final building block, the one that ties everything together. And that's what we call synergy.
Synergy. Tell me more about that. How does synergy fit into the whole picture of international strategy?
Synergy is about creating a whole chain that's greater than the sum of its parts. It's about leveraging the interconnectedness of your different business units, your different markets, your different operations to create something truly powerful.
So it's not just about each part working well on its own. It's about those parts working together in a way that amplifies their impact.
Exactly. It's about finding ways to share knowledge transfer, best practices, coordinate activities, leverage your brand equity across all those different markets.
It sounds like a well-oiled machine, where all the gears are turning in sync to drive global success. Do you have any real-world examples of companies that have really mastered this concept of synergy?
Oh, tons. I mean, think about a company like Apple. They've got this amazing ecosystem of products that all work seamlessly together. Their brand is incredibly consistent across markets. And they've built this incredibly loyal customer base all over the world. That's synergy in action.
Yeah, that's a great example. So we've got our 4 building blocks: distinctive competence, scope of operations, resource deployment, and synergy. But even with all these elements in place, there's another layer of complexity that companies need to grapple with when they're expanding internationally, right? This whole global-local balancing act.
You're exactly right. It's this constant tension between wanting to standardize your operations for efficiency and wanting to adapt to the specific needs and preferences of different markets. It's a challenge that every multinational corporation faces.
It's fascinating, right? Some companies like McDonald's, for example, they've been really successful with a pretty standardized approach. The Big Mac pretty much tastes the same wherever you go in the world. But other companies, like food companies or media companies, they have to be much more sensitive to those local nuances.
Totally. I mean, think about it. You can't just translate a marketing campaign directly from one language to another and expect it to resonate with consumers in a different culture. Humor doesn't always translate. Tastes are different. Values are different. You gotta be aware of those subtleties.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, that perfect blend of global consistency and local relevance. It's like being a chameleon, adapting your approach based on the environment you're in. But how do companies figure out the right path? How do they decide how much to standardize versus how much to adapt?
Well, there are these 4 main strategic alternatives that companies can choose from. Each one has its own pros and cons. It really depends on the company's specific situation, their industry, their goals.
Okay, let's break it down. What are these 4 strategic alternatives? Let's start with the first one.
All right, the first one is called the home replication strategy. It's basically about taking what worked in your home market and trying to replicate it in foreign markets with as little adaptation as possible.
So it's kind of like the if it ain't broke, don't fix it approach.
Yeah, kind of. But it can be risky if you're not careful. I mean, just because something works in one market doesn't mean it's going to work everywhere. You got to be aware of those cultural differences and consumer preferences that we were talking about earlier.
Right. It's like trying to export your culture along with your product.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work. Okay, what about the second strategic alternative?
The second one is called the multi-domestic strategy. This one is all about going hyper-local. It's about giving your subsidiaries a lot of autonomy to tailor their products, their marketing, their operations to the specific needs of their local markets.
So it's like having multiple mini companies all operating under one global umbrella.
Exactly. Each subsidiary is kind of like its own independent entity, responding directly to the demands of its local market.
That sounds incredibly responsive to local needs.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be a nightmare to manage? I mean, wouldn't it lead to all sorts of inconsistencies and inefficiencies across the organization?
It can, yeah. You gain responsiveness, but you might lose some efficiency and economies of scale. It's a trade-off. All right, now for the third strategic alternative, the global strategy. This one is all about standardization and efficiency.
So it's like the opposite of the multi-domestic strategy. Instead of adapting to each local market, you're trying to create a unified global brand experience.
Exactly. Products are developed and marketed globally with centralized control from headquarters. It's all about achieving cost savings through economies of scale.
Makes sense. But wouldn't this approach struggle in markets where local preferences are really strong?
Yeah, it can lead to a disconnect between the company's offerings and the specific needs of diverse markets. It's not always the best approach. And then finally, we have the transnational strategy. This one is kind of like the holy grail of international business. It's the most complex and the most ambitious of the 4.
Okay, the transnational strategy. What makes it so special?
The transnational strategy tries to combine the best of both worlds. It aims to achieve both global efficiency and local responsiveness. It's about creating a truly global network of interconnected subsidiaries that share knowledge leverage, best practices, adapt to local needs, but all while maintaining a unified global brand identity.
Wow, that sounds incredibly difficult to pull off. It's like walking a tightrope.
It is. It requires a very specific organizational structure, a culture of collaboration and knowledge sharing a highly skilled global workforce. But when it's done right, it can be incredibly powerful. It allows companies to have their cake and eat it too.
So we've got our 4 strategic alternatives: home replication, multi-domestic, global, and transnational.
Yeah.
But once a company has chosen its approach, how do its subsidiaries fit into the picture? What roles do they play within this complex global network?
That's a great question. And it leads us to the next level of complexity in international strategic management, understanding the different roles that subsidiaries can play within a multinational corporation.
Well, this is already incredibly insightful. We've talked about the essential building blocks of a successful international strategy, the tension between global integration and local adaptation, and the different strategic alternatives that companies can choose from. Let's continue our deep dive into the roles of subsidiaries and how they contribute to a company's global success after a quick break. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking about, all these different aspects of international strategic management, the big picture stuff, the strategic choices companies have to make. But now I want to zoom in on the subsidiaries, the actual boots on the ground, the people who are interacting with customers in those local markets. What roles do they play in a company's global success?
Yeah, subsidiaries are super important. They're more than just like branch offices. They're vital pieces of the puzzle, and their roles can be really different depending on the company, the industry, all sorts of factors.
So let's talk about those roles.
Sure.
What are some of the ways that subsidiaries can contribute to a company's global strategy?
Well, one common role is what we call the strategic leader. These are subsidiaries that are in, really key markets, and they tend to have a lot of expertise in a particular area. They work really closely with headquarters to develop and implement strategies, and they often take the lead on specific products or functions within the global network.
So they're not just taking orders from headquarters, they're actually shaping the company's global strategy.
Exactly. They're like the eyes and ears of the company in those key markets, providing valuable insights and intelligence that can inform the company's overall direction. Then you have subsidiaries that play the role of contributor.
Contributors, how are they different from strategic leaders?
Contributors might not be in like the most strategically important markets, but they bring something special to the table. They might have, unique skills or resources that are valuable to the entire company. Maybe they excel in a particular product category, or they've developed some kind of unique expertise in a certain area of operations.
So they're like the specialists, the niche players that add depth to the company's global capabilities.
Exactly. Their contributions might be more focused, but they're still essential to the company's overall success. Then you've got the implementers.
Implementers. So these are the ones who are all about execution.
Yep, that's them. Implementers are focused on, getting things done. They're all about efficiency, making sure that the strategies that are developed by headquarters are actually put into practice in their local markets.
So they're the ones making sure that the wheels keep turning, that the global vision is translated into local action. They're all about operational excellence.
Absolutely. They're focused on maximizing performance in their respective markets, making sure that customers are happy, that products and services are delivered efficiently, all that good stuff. And then you have a role that's a bit more challenging, the black hole.
Black hole. Doesn't sound good. What is a black hole subsidiary?
Well, black hole subsidiaries are those that operate in markets that are strategically important, but for whatever reason, they're just not performing as well as they should be. Maybe they're facing really tough competition, or maybe they just don't have the resources they need to succeed.
So they're like the underperformers, the ones that are struggling to gain traction.
Yeah, you could say that. They present a real dilemma for multinational companies. On the one hand, they're in markets that the company wants to be in, but on the other hand, they're not really contributing as much as they could be.
So what do companies do with these black hole subsidiaries?
Well, they have a few options. They can try to invest more resources, try to turn things around. They can partner with local companies to try to get a stronger foothold in the market. Or in some cases, they might just decide to cut their losses and exit the market altogether. It really depends on the specific situation.
So it sounds like managing all these different subsidiary roles is pretty complex. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Definitely not. Every subsidiary is unique, and companies need to be flexible, adaptable in how they manage these different roles. And then on top of all that, you've got to consider the fact that the global landscape itself is constantly changing.
That's a great point. The world is changing so fast, and international strategic management is not a static field. What are some of the trends that are shaping the future of global business? What do companies need to be thinking about?
Well, one of the biggest trends is the rise of data. Companies are collecting mountains of data from all sorts of sources, customer interactions, market trends, social media, and they're using that data to make better decisions, more informed decisions about everything from product development to marketing to their supply chain.
So it's not just about gut feeling anymore. It's about using hard data to make strategic choices.
Exactly. Data is power. And
Mhm.
companies that can harness the power of data analytics are going to have a huge advantage in the global marketplace. And another big trend is the need for agility.
Agility. Yeah, we hear that word a lot these days. What does it mean in the context of international business?
It means being able to adapt quickly to change. The global marketplace is constantly shifting. There are new technologies, new competitors, new geopolitical risks popping up all the time. Companies need to be nimble, able to pivot and adjust their strategies on the fly.
So it's not about having a rigid 5-year plan anymore. It's about being flexible, being responsive to change.
Exactly. And that ties into another big trend, which is collaboration. Companies are realizing that they can't do it all themselves. They need to collaborate with partners, with suppliers, with even competitors sometimes, to tap into the best ideas and the best talent from around the world.
It's like creating a global brain where knowledge and innovation can flow freely.
That's a great way to put it. And of course, we can't forget about sustainability. That's a huge trend that's impacting every aspect of business these days.
Absolutely. It's not just about doing good anymore. It's about doing well by doing good.
Right. Consumers are demanding it. Investors are demanding it. Regulators are demanding it. Companies that don't take sustainability seriously are going to get left behind.
So it's a business imperative as much as it is a moral imperative.
Exactly. And we're seeing companies integrate sustainability into everything they do, from their products to their supply chains to their overall business strategy. It's not just a PR stunt anymore. It's core to how they operate.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive into the world of international strategic management. We've covered so much ground, from the fundamental philosophies to the challenges of managing global subsidiaries to the trends that are shaping the future of global business.
It's been a pleasure exploring this topic with you. It's such a dynamic field. There's always something new to learn.
I couldn't agree more. And for our listeners out there, whether you're a seasoned executive or just starting out in your career, I hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought. The world of international business is complex, it's challenging, but it's also incredibly exciting.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into international strategic management. Keep learning, keep exploring, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the global marketplace.
See you next time.